Good morning, everyone. Today I am demonstrating the Visual Spatial method of teaching of a learner. Imagine yourself being scourged. How does it feel? What are the pain that you are experiencing? Or being hated by the community. Imagine that you are not welcome in the community. How does it feel? Or the worst thing is, or being in the arena where you will be devoured by a lion as the people cheer. Think of those gruesome experience in your mind. Let me read Psalm 79:2. The dead bodies of your servants they have given as food for the birds of the heavens, the flesh of your saints to the beasts of the earth. The lesson for today is, I entitled it, God will never forsake His people. As a sort of background, let me read to you what John MacArthur said. This is a lament psalm during Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of the temple in 586. The psalm contains the prayer of the nation's spiritual needs. Of course, the background is the people are experiencing distress, their temple are being destroyed, and then they need the prayer. They need to pray for the nation's spiritual needs, curses against the enemies of God's people, and also praises in God's anticipation of God's actions. These are some sort of background of this psalm written by Asaph. Harold Wilmington said, Asaph cries out to God because of pagans have overrun and slaughtered the people. He calls upon God to vindicate His people and exact vengeance on their oppression. This is sort of background. We see that people, or the Israelites in particular, are experiencing difficult times. Their temple, their worship place are being destroyed. People are being slaughtered, left laid in the open. So it's a very difficult thing for them to experience. I have outlined my lesson tonight. This morning, by the way, this outline is by Harold L. Wilmington. He owns this outline. First, the pain of Israel. We can see that in verse 1 to 4, where Asaph cries out to God regarding the following troubles. So they are in distress. Asaph writing, they are in distress. First, he cries to God, the land, the city of Jerusalem and the temple have been overrun by pagans. We can see that clearly in verses 1 to 4. In verse 1 in particular, Asaph asking God to help them because in their situation, this is the pain that they are experiencing. Their temple has been defiled sexually, religiously, and ceremonially. So they have been in great distress. That is why Asaph called to God for deliverance. Second, the people have been slaughtered. They have been massacred. So you imagine how difficult it is for Asaph to write this psalm. Of course, human as we are, he experienced a emotional distress during this time. Plus seeing the people slaughtered all over the place, laid in waste. That is in verse 2 and 3. And then in verse 4, we can see The people are mocked by their neighbors. Let me read verse 4. We have become reproach to our neighbors, a scorn and derision to those who are around us. They become a laughing stock. They become a laughing item to the people. So you can see the pain of Israel. As I relate this to the title of the lesson, God will never forsake His people. But looking at these verses, we can see it seems that God is silent to His own people. But of course, we understand that God is sovereign. And here we can see the pain of Israel. Asaph cries out to God for help, for the land, for the people being slaughtered, and the sad experience that they're being reproached and scorned by the people. And then the second main item is the prayer of Israel. We can see that in verses 5 to 13. Asaph asked several requests to God. We can see the heart and the concern of Asaph here. In verses 6 and 7, we can see concerning God's enemies. So concerning God's enemies. Let me read verse 6. Pour out your wrath on the nations that do not know you, and on the kingdoms that do not call on your name. Verse 7. For they have devoured Jacob and laid waste in dwelling place. So this is the prayer of Asaph. Pour out your wrath on the nations that refuse to recognize you. Asaph is asking God to reveal His power and to reveal who He is, because we understand that the people or their neighbors, they believe in the pantheon of gods. That is why we can see Asaph wanted to declare the only true God by revealing His power, by pouring out His wrath to these sinful and wicked people. Another request concerning God's people. After praying, after requesting for vindication to God's people, we can see here that Asaph once again prays concerning God's people. But let me move forward to verse 12. And return to our neighbors sevenfold in their bosom their reproach with which they have reproached you, O Lord. There we can see that Asaph was trying to magnify the name of God. He wants to vindicate this evil people. And in his second request, we can see in verse 5 to 8, forgive us. Asaph asked God to be merciful and do not hold his people guilty of their sin. We can see that he is asking for help. Though Asaph understands that if they regard iniquities in their heart, the Lord will not hear them. That is why, first and foremost in his request, he is trying to cleanse himself and ask God for forgiveness. The second one is help us, that is in verse 9. Help us, O God, for our salvation, for the glory of your name, and deliver us and provide atonement for our sin, for your name's sake. So we can see that not only Asaph neglected the responsibility or the consequences of sin, but he is even asking God for mercy, just to help them. But God will give His deliverance to His distressed and troubled people, Israel. And then the third, that is in verses 10 to 12, avenge us. Avenge us. Asaph asked God to demonstrate His great power and avenge them. We can see that after asking forgiveness, he asked God for deliverance, and then in particular, he wants God to demonstrate His great power in avenging them. And then the fourth one, the praise from Israel, God's people will thank and praise Him forever. So we, your people and sheep of your pasture, we will give you thanks forever. We will show forth the praise to all generations. You see, we know that in the future, this city will face their ultimate destruction. We can see that in Revelation 11 or Revelation 13, 11 to 18. But looking back to the church history, we can see that what are the causes of people's hatred. We understand that the cause of their hatred was the distinctive lifestyle of these Christians. AD 67, where Nero persecuted the Christians because of their distinctive lifestyle. Tertullian said, "What a reputation." Christians, it is a term hagios, often translated saints. It means holy ones. The Christian, therefore, is a person who is fundamentally different. So that is the main cause why people hated the Christians in early church history. In order to understand Roman distrust of Christianity, one must understand Roman view of religion. For the Romans, religion was first and foremost a social activity that promoted unity and loyalty to the state. So whenever there is loyalty and unity, the Roman government would not bother you. They would not interfere. But whenever there is that distinctiveness that would cause them to see that there is disloyalty, then you will perish. A religious attitude that Romans called pietas, or piety in English, Cicero wrote that a piety in Roman sense were to disappear, social unity and justice will perish along with it. So you see, in the Old Testament they are being persecuted, probably part of their sin, but it is God's sovereignty wherein God will declare His power to this pagan nation. The extent of persecution, the total number of Christian martyrs in the early church is unknown. It's unknown. Although some early writers speaks of great multitude, there have been, as the early writers would say, that there is great massacre of multitude being killed. Modern scholars tend to believe that actual number is not so great as sometimes imagined. You see, out of 54 emperors who ruled between 30 to 311 AD, there were only about a dozen that would went out their way to persecute Christians. Note that one of that is persecution under Nero in 64. Christians experienced 129 years of persecution. And that is not only simple persecution, as what we have experienced for some of us today, but for them, it meant or it cost their lives. And 120 years of toleration and peace. So for a moment, they are at peace, and then again, they are in distress. It has been estimated that more Christians have been martyred in the last 50 years than the church's first 300 years. So it's sad to know that even in the Old Testament, people are being persecuted. In the Old Testament, in the early church, people are being persecuted for the cause of Christ. But what makes them cost their life for the cause of Christ? Because we believe that they believe that there will be a reward someday. There will be a martyr's crown. There will be a victor's crown. Everyone who competes the prize is temperate in all things. They will obtain imperishable crown. crown of righteousness for those who love His appearing. Those are the rewards that they anticipated that they received. You see, blessed are you when men hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil, because the Son of Man rejoiced in that day and leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. And I believe, even in the Old Testament people, the people of God suffered for the cause of God. They believe that they will be rewarded in heaven someday. This temporal and brief suffering, how shall it be exchanged for the reward of the bright and eternal honor? Saint Cyprian of Carthage wrote this one. So are we different from the world? The same as Christians in the early church are being persecuted because they are distinct. Would you be willing to stand for Christ? Would you be willing to be different from the world? Are we committed to suffer for the cause of Christ? For some, it meant death for them. But for us, maybe family persecutions. But are we committed to suffer for the cause of Christ? The last is, are we anticipating the Lord's return and receive the rewards? That would be a glorious reward with Christ. God revealed this word not only to fill our minds with information, but also to transform our lives to impact others for Christ. So as we remember those people in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, even in the early church history, let us be reminded that let us be different from the world. Let us suffer the persecution, for we know that in heaven there is great reward. Thank you.